Thank you, Frank. And you would be a noble, so you would have high rank. This is a very interesting topic to me. You're dealing with, of course, the period before the Renaissance and Reformation and the so-called late Middle Ages, and then the thought, as so often will occur, between the Plantagenets and then, of course, the Tudors. So we got to go through, two royal families, the Lancastrians and the Yorkists, and the so-called Wars of the Roses, which, I mean, it's rather insulting to the roses if you are a floral type. I mean, it's very offensive if you ask me, but very important period. And of course, as I think Frank indicated, it is a period of great chaos. Not that I can imagine that there were too many people out there that say, do we really need a monarch? Maybe there's another way we can go. No, if you're waiting for Oliver Cromwell, we that's not going to come in my time, okay? Because those folks are coming later. You might talk about it with your friends in the closet, but I don't think you're going to be outed as some, blankety blank Republican. I think everybody wants a monarch. It's just which one. And of course, we have problems of plenty. As you can see, the figure is 5. If you want to think about the kings who died unnaturally, and that's not a good way to go. I think we like to be in our bed, and we like to have the priest and all those little accoutrements when the time goes. But losing the throne and losing the life is very, very unfortunate. Children, and I call them incompetence, which is just my opinion. And number 3 has to do, of course, with there just too many folks. Yeah, it's just, for example, we love Edward III very much, but all of those sons, and we think having more and more sons, that's wonderful. Well, it can be, but so often you just feel like you can't give them enough to keep them happy. And the result will be, you guessed it, struggle and fight, and we will see that. Finally, and you see in quotation marks, natural advisors. And who are your natural advisors? They are the people who are the nobles. They want to be you, but they're not. Those are the natural advisors, because if I can't be number 1, I want to be number 2. I want to be number 3. And if you, as some did, want to ignore them and just hang out with your cronies, that may be a problem. That may be a very, very serious problem, because many of these kings, Richard II, for example, are going to have, I don't know, buddies, playmates. Edward II did. And you see, they didn't die happily. So all of these are just issues that we will be coming across. I had to drop Edward II, but he is an interesting character, and he definitely died unnaturally. The details we will leave for another time. So that's number 1. And of course, this won't be on the test, but 1307 to 1327. Okay. But you don't have to know that. Okay. All of this is to say that Edward III, 1327 to 1377, and he will rule all those years. Not always happily, but it seemed like a good idea, the first few decades, and then lapsing into senility not so much, when he would be more or less supervised by his son, the so-called Black Prince. The Black Prince, it's always interesting to speculate what it would have been like if the Black Prince had not died the year before Edward III, but we'll never know, will we? So the fact is that when he died in 1376 and the king died in 1377, rather than having the brother of the Black Prince, because of the nature of the succession back in that day, it wouldn't be one of the mature brothers of the Black Prince. And believe you me, they wanted it. But, I'm sure they were not sitting there thinking, I wonder what dad left me in the will, that kind of thing. I think they understood, because of the principle of succession, which is no longer in effect, finally, now in the 21st century, right? But didn't affect these people. They went to the son of the Black Prince, and that will be Richard II, as every Shakespearean scholar. I don't know if there's a Cliff Notes for that, but anyway, we can read it in the original, now. I'm not going to assign specific acts, but you may want to get to that while you're doing penance. The various uncles are basically saying, we love this little kid, but, well, maybe in a way, as he's a cute little nephew, that kind of thing. Maybe I'm dreaming, but that's the idea, at least as far as his famous uncle, John of Gaunt. If you wondered, and maybe secretly you wondered this, maybe you didn't, why was he called John of Gaunt? And of course, it was because he was born in Ghent, because of his mother's background. That is to say, part of the area where many of you have been, where he settled. Now, he married and obtained a lot of land as a result, including those lands of Lancaster, which will be very important. It's fair to say of John of Gaunt, he was one of the great non-kings of his age. Probably one of the greatest. I have to call him non-king because that was about all he wasn't. Yeah, I mean, he was so powerful, he was so strong, and it's like he just lost out. But little Richard always had Uncle John to depend on. So I know that was a low blow, but you get the idea that we're not talking Lucille here. We are talking the young Richard. And I have the little tyke in one of his famous outings at the Peasants' Revolt. Now, they'll give you all kind of stories when you take that Tower of London tour. I remember, oh God, all the souvenirs and all that. They probably have Cliff Notes there for all I know. But the idea is more or less that in the chronicles, they will talk about he and the other important people were there, surrounded by this mob of people. And finally, he paraded around. The people said, "Oh, he's so cute. Look at little Richard," that kind of thing. The way people did. Isn't George's birthday? The son of the Prince of Wales. Yeah, his birthday. Why do I know that? And yeah, but anyway, cute kid. But the idea is that they paraded around, and I gather the famous rebel leader Wat Tyler got too near, and the mayor of London pulled out his weapon and ran him through, and the people got all nervous and went back home. And of course, that was the end of the revolt, except for the cleanup. And that was early on in Richard's reign. Doesn't have much of a aftermath as far, but it's important, I guess, because Richard was involved. Meanwhile, John of Gaunt supervised Richard in his growing up and being a teenager and dealing with all those issues. Richard married a nice bohemian, and he loved her very much. As far as I'm aware, one of those unusually happy marriages of royalty. So much so that when he didn't think his nobles were paying enough respect at her funeral, he had a real fit. I think he hit one. I mean, that took a lot, because Richard was not, it's in quote unquote maturity, because he died quite young. So this is supposed to be a portrayal of him. John of Gaunt more or less ran the government. And Richard had his friends, and they pursued their own interests. So, for example, he wanted his grandfather, Edward II, or great-grandfather, Edward II, to be made a saint. So he would write, letters of support to the Pope and say, "Dear Holy Father," he was a martyr to the faith. And that didn't happen. You got back letters saying, "We'll put that on file," and it's things like that. So Richard, and I don't know if this is with John of Gaunt's encouragement, but possibly John of Gaunt had other interests in Spain, for example, and he went to Spain to pursue those of his wife. And so maybe he just basically told Richard, maybe we can just work out a deal with the French, because, your dad, he passed away over there. And, I just wonder if our losses are just, maybe we'll go back another time. So Richard said, "Fine with me. I'm a lot more interested in Ireland and Scotland, to tell you the truth." So all of this is to say that they had a sort of understanding with the French. I'm not saying peace in our time. It's not like that. It's just, let's just take a break. And let's just see if we can establish an understanding. And the odd thing is, and perhaps not so odd, but he made an enemy of his cousin Henry. And you think, so often, shouldn't they have cared deeply for each other? I don't know whether it was competition for the affection of John. Maybe I'm trying to be melodramatic about that. But for whatever the case, Henry, so-called Henry Bolingbroke, the future Henry IV, will be the heir to John of Gaunt's Lancastrian lands. And I think he was jealous of Richard II. And maybe there was just a mutual enmity. I'm sure you love your cousins, but in this case, I'm not so sure. It's a very difficult relationship. And on the scale of 1 to 10, in terms of, ratemymonarch.com, I'm thinking Richard probably was a 2. He just didn't seem to have it. If John of Gaunt, the uncle, had been the king, he would have been more popular. I don't think, again, that Richard was a good politician. He did not have the interests of the nobility. He just wanted to pursue his particular interests, which had to do, with making his great-grandfather a saint, or things like just sort of far out interests, we might say today. Now a tree for you. Yes, and this is a mighty oak with lots of limbs. This is not, you don't have to memorize this, okay? Aren't you glad? I am very understanding. Would that not be painful though, if you had this would be on your phone? Gosh, you would need extra time, maybe a tutorial. As far as that goes, there's John of Gaunt, and you think, gosh, John of Gaunt, you see him there, Edward III, and there's Black Prince. And I want you to notice something. You see somebody between John of Gaunt and the Black Prince. I know. See Lionel there? And you think, well, why are his sons excited about? Well, they are. But somehow John of Gaunt, who's number 3. You see? Black Prince number 1, then Lionel. Well, this sort of first is with Moses. I mean, he just stepped forward. That is John of Gaunt. And boy, did he know how to marry. You see Blanche of Lancaster. Now, she died in 1369, but it's not unnatural. People died. But she had her children. There's Henry. So don't forget that. So he's married again to someone in Spain. Ooh, and there's number 3. And if you want to read some novels, some of them that are not good and some of the extra romantic and probably available in paperback, if you know what I mean, it'll be about number 3. They don't even list number 2. There's Catherine Swynford. And as we used to say in the South, they used to tuck up. Yeah, I know. That's not elegant. Yes, that is not polite lingo in an academic setting. But a priest did not celebrate their union. He had a wife, but he was living in sin with Catherine Swynford. But that's why all the novels, because the true love. So biology took its course, as it does, and they had little love children, as they're called, and they will have to be legitimized by Parliament later on, because he'll marry her. That'll be in the later chapters of the book, Harlequin or otherwise, whichever. But Catherine Swynford, kind of an interesting character, and she will marry John of Gaunt. The only reason I note that is So you see those children, and the way it gets down to someone we all know, the Tudor dynasty beginner, Henry VII. You say, wow, I want to study that tree. You can take it home and have it with you at all times while you study. But yeah, I mean, that's really in depth, isn't it? And all because of Edward III and biology. Yep. That's what does it. Look at all those sons. And it just keeps on going. There's a lot of love there. Or a lot of blood there. Both. Now, this seems a little grotesque by the standards of today, because why would a man in his 20s have a young child like that? Well, it's politics. Everybody will remember Catherine of Valois, who married Henry V. Well, this is her sister, and we'll come back to her. But this is Isabella of Valois, one of the children of Charles VI. So she gets shipped over to England, because of that peace treaty. And his wife had died a couple of years back. But this sort of like scene in reality didn't amount to anything because clearly she was not of age. So by the time, let's just say, her period as Queen of England would end, 2 or 3 years later. And you know what that means? She gets shipped home. So that's the end of it. And wait for another marriage. So, but it's kind of grotesquely interesting because she was 8 or 9 years old. So I guess she had her teachers and nursemaids and otherwise. But I mean, the idea of his yummy, baby, I don't think all that. It's nothing of that sort. So here we have all of the strangeness of Richard II, and more of it you can read in Shakespeare. The canonization campaign. He wanted to be maybe Roman emperor by working the German situation to get elected king. I mean, it's bizarre because there are no chances. And of course, being huffy around your natural advisors and saying, like, you people are not worthy of my attention. And, it's sort of that Sun King thing. We're not ready for Louis XIV, are we? Especially in England. And Henry and his cousin Henry got treated the worst, which is very odd considering he was the son of John of Gaunt, who was, like, not to be sentimental, Richard's substitute father. Have you thought about that? I mean, he couldn't remember the Black Prince. Now, his mother, who was actually a Plantagenet herself, but we won't get into that. I think the Black Prince and his mother, Joan, were actually, what do we call it in the South? Kissing cousins? Or maybe they weren't kissing, but they were kissing afterwards because they had him. And, but he was a mama's boy as far as that goes. But he also has John of Gaunt. I guess he loved him. He might have resented him, but whatever the case, Henry did not like him, and Henry was the leading light among the quote unquote natural advisors. And they weren't getting much respect. I love this particular picture because, again, it's not a scene of great reality, no more than that picture of the new young queen. It shows the king being arrested, but in fact, he had just come back from a quick trip to Ireland. I know he had led an army. I don't think the English in that Ireland. Yeah, we can't get enough. We're going to bring them under control. Think of how important that is. So he will be very shocked, as you can imagine, when Henry, whose lands had already been confiscated because Richard considered Henry a faithless vassal, I guess you would say. They were still using that kind of lingo. So they bring him under arrest and he gets checked in to the royal suite at the Tower of London. Yeah, you say that. Wait, are you sure? Yeah, let me check your papers. Yeah, we were looking for a king named Richard, and you're the one. So I think he was about 25, 26 by this point. Isn't that wild? But he'd been king a long time. While he was a guest, shall we say, at the Tower, he was not well treated by Henry and his advisors, and he was encouraged to consider his unworthiness. I don't think this was so much for the good of his soul as they had certain papers that he needed to sign. And these were abdication papers. If you saw the abdication papers, they will basically say, I'm not worthy. I am just hideous. I'm so ashamed. I should never be king. I love everybody. I wish you all a happy day and a good. I mean, it's like lawyers were working on this because this will be basically an abdication statement, and it will be, I'm abdicating because I'm being made to, but I love you and I want to be your king. No, 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 no. I'm not worthy to be your king. I'm a loser. And that will be the statement they will get. He agrees to it. So we have the abdication / deposition. And now, in what is very irregular, Henry, now with his Lancastrian lands restored, will say, gosh, I don't think there's a king. I think I have a paper here that says there isn't a king. Yeah. There's an ex-king, a loser, a no good bumsky. So, in the absence of a king, I think I'll call a parliament. Would that be okay? Does anybody object? Seeing none. You nobles, you bishops, come on up, and we will meet as a parliament. Okay, now that you're here for our parliament, I hate to tell you, but we don't have a king on the throne. Gee, I wonder what we could do now. Does anybody have any nominations? Moi. Yeah, I mean, it is just, I mean, it's about as silly as I'm describing it, but they will agree. And happy to tell you it was unanimous. It's like the elections during the Cold War in Moscow. I mean, gosh, does anybody want to oppose Big Joe Stalin? No, I think not. So that was him. Henry will become king. You say, but what about Lionel's family, number two? Oh, well, they're hurt and disappointed, but Henry's there. So he will now be proclaimed as Henry the Fourth. Part one and part two, and you could get Cliff notes for that too, I'm sure. How do you feel though if you are Henry IV? Well, he seemed to like it, even though most of us, well, all of us, because we are all, but Henry didn't seem to have a problem when Richard had to go. Well, Richard hadn't pushed 30 yet. You said, well, he's mighty young, but he had melancholia. And you say, well, has that been diagnosed by Dr. Freud? Not exactly, but what they did, they put him on a real strict diet, and that took care of Richard. At first, I think they were just going to leave him as a prisoner, but there were some stir-ups like Restore Richard Society or We Love Richard. And Henry IV decided we don't want any nostalgia freaks, and Richard ex-king is basically damaged goods. So he's got to go, and they announced he had melancholia. And so it'll get you every time. It's a very fatal disease. So, yeah, I mean, it's, they may have starved him to death, but whatever the case, he was gone. Now, Isabella going to France. Okay, so the young queen is now former queen, Queen Emerita, as we would say in the academic world. But she's out of the picture, and Henry IV and his wife are, as they would say in the old song, in the money, king and queen. And wherever Henry IV goes, he will bear the U word. You think, gosh, you don't mean, yes, I do, usurper. And that can hurt. Names can hurt. I don't think you would want to say that, right when you're facing him, but all around him, usurper. And I mean, and this is not just a Richard nostalgia group. It's like, it just doesn't seem like Henry can do anything to please people, and he had various physical ailments. And like I say, when you read Henry IV, you will find out it's more like, oh gosh, this is like some sort of HBO mystery, because after you do the dirty deed, you think everything is going to go great for you. Yeah. And then everybody's going to come up and say, yeah, now that we've, murdered so-and-so, everything's going to be great. So how about my part of the take? And you can, sinister, evil, wicked. Yeah. Think all those words. Inferno. Yeah. Because I don't think they're thinking too much about that. But his various confederates, shall we say, that is to say, of Henry and the usurpation, are going to be demanding their piece of the pie. And as we all have read and seen so often, they can never get enough. So he will spend much of his sad reign trying to satisfy these people. And everybody says, gosh, I'm glad we did away with Richard. We love you so. It's just not that way. And his own son, the Prince Hal, as we say in Shakespeare. Henry V, that we love so much in the 1989 film. Yeah, Kenneth Branagh. Yeah. And or Laurence Olivier in 44, if you want to go back. So you think how interesting it was when we think of Henry V, but then he was a big success until dysentery comes along. Yes. And he is out of commission. I had to skip him, although he's fascinating, but he's not part of our story because technically he was almost king of England and France, you'll remember. Remember the 100 Years' War? Great times. Except he was a year off in terms of death. Because remember, the next year his father-in-law, Charles VI, died, and therefore this person, this very sad person, Henry VI, now became king of England and France. Remember, he was just a baby when his father died. He was the product of Henry V and Margaret of Anjou, of Catherine of Valois. Catherine of Valois, remember, is the sister of Isabella of Valois. So you say, well, I wonder if they, oh, sis, how are things in England? Did you have a good time? How's the food over there? No, I wonder about that. It's probably like, because Isabella was already back, and they bring out the next one for marriage to an Englishman. So this time, remember that Catherine, thanks to the loss of Charles VI to the English, she will be sacrificed for that marriage. And her brother will then be dispossessed. You remember that? That her brother, who will be the future Charles VII, that Charles VI and Isabella the Queen will say, you know, he was a boo-boo. He wasn't really our son. And remember all of that. Never mind. Henry, as many of you know, probably inherited from his French grandfather the mental issues that he will face increasingly during his life. Now, this is Henry VI. Whenever I think of Henry VI, you know what I think of? Cambridge. Yeah, King's College. And the choir, you know. You hear it holidays, and I think, poor Henry. But try to think of something nice. You know, you don't want to think of anything negative. And the college that bears the title King's College, and it still has a reference to him, bless his heart, because he had a difficult life, to say the least. His years before marriage were largely devoted to music and the arts. Nothing wrong with that. But he probably was not cut out to be a king. I suspect Margaret of Anjou, after the death of Henry V, she probably started dating pretty soon afterwards. And so, I mean, God, she was probably 19 or 20. You can't blame somebody for trying to have a social life, right? Any event, Henry VI was not an active person as king, put it that way. There were regents in both England and France. And even as he grew up, nothing wrong with this, he spent a lot of time going to church and very involved in theology studies, no Cliff Notes. And basically, he was not a serious king. I'm not saying he was worldly. He's out of this world, if you ask me. During his reign, however, they finally decided you need a wife. I mean, the idea of having the bachelor king, we're not ready for another James Buchanan, remember him? Our only bachelor president. We don't want to have another problem like we did, with Richard II, right? So they decided to find him a wife. So this time they have to go to the sort of second or third rank of French. They're not first line. Margaret of Anjou was the daughter of a count. But nothing wrong with being the daughter of a count. It's just not the top, sort of B team, junior varsity. You're not right up there at the top. And I'm not sure that it mattered too much to Henry one way or the other. So they were married. And I think she did, some orientation and getting used to it. And boy, she got really used to it. And Margaret of Anjou, as some of you know from some of these historical series, became quite the firecracker. So we'll get into her. And I'm not sure how she managed to have a son. I mean, I know about biology. Please, I have gone to school, so I heard about that. But was that Henry's? Well, we'll never know that. But she did get pregnant at the same year that they lost Bordeaux. Yeah. So that's the end of the 100 Years' War, because that was the last possession of the English in France, except for Calais. Very, very sad moment, I guess, for all concerned. But if you're a French interest, then this is a great day, I guess. I don't think the people of Bordeaux welcomed them, but they lost. So that was the end for the English. I mean, I don't think they ever said, yeah, we'll be back though. I don't know. All that we know is that now those around Henry are going like, are you sure? Let's take you to another obstetrician for a second opinion. I mean, I'm not so sure. It's like they really had doubts as to the baby. But when the baby came, as it did, you would think, oh, hip, hip, hooray, like we were all excited for William and the princess. But in this case, all of those cousins are going like, darn it, rats, because they wanted him to die childless so they could take the throne. His grandfather was a usurper. So usurping is cool. Yeah, so why can't I usurp? All of this had to do with the Wars of the Roses and the struggle for power. Because I promised you number 2. Remember, Lionel, you haven't forgotten. I don't need to pull out a big treat for you again. I think you'll remember that the number 2 son was there, but just for the heck of it, I'll pull it out just for a second. But look at that, where that line goes. You see that red? My finger's there, I think. York. See York? That's where we're going next. Yeah. Why are we going there? Because Henry, who has these bells, I will call them, is not doing well. And before that blankety blank Margaret comes along, she the cousins, the Yorkist cousins, are going to be the king's advisors. We just want to help you. Oh, well, thank you. Merci beaucoup. I think we're still using French back then. So the idea is that when the king does get married, and and the queen says, well, we really appreciate you folks. That is so sweet of you to help Henry. But now that I'm here, I'm his bride, I'm the queen. So I'm going to be having a lot of the responsibility. And we really appreciate you, though. Y'all stop by again, okay? Want to see you all real. I mean, and these people saying, we don't like her. I wish she could go back to Anjou. And so when she is with child, they're the ones that want that second opinion from the obstetrician, because they are furious. So that is the genesis of this Wars of the Roses. The nobles fighting among each other, one side. And you say, well, what about peasants? They're working in the fields. Somebody's got to work, because these folks are fighting. You say, are they good for nothing? Yes. And are peasants? No. Poor peasants. They ain't got anything. A little land here, a little animal there. But they're not fighting in this War of the Roses. This is basically a struggle of the nobles. Some supporting Richard, and others, I guess you'd say, supporting Henry VI, or at least his cause, because, as you know, he is increasingly in mental distress. And of course, it means that Margaret, who really, I would call her almost on the job training, because she was about 17 or 18. And you have known, we all have, people that age, and you generally think they're probably not that serious, ready to have a baby and take on the rule of a country and be tough and all that. But she was one, I guess. There's nothing like being right there. And I guess this has to do with maternal concerns. Edward of Westminster, her son, will now become the object. There will be no more children and no more concerns for her. How do you like that pious stained glass? Gosh, I mean, I wonder how many favors he had to get that done. Now, this is Richard. He does not become king, but he's the first of the Yorkists to be Henry's chief advisor, shall we say. So Henry is being surrounded by Richard and his friends as Henry gets married. And then, of course, Richard is going to have competition. Unfortunately for Richard, he will be killed in battle. And so that'll be the end of him. But we got a son, and he will be very important. Here he is. And that is Edward. Died when he was 40 years old. And tall, handsome, and affable. it will become a struggle between Edward and Margaret. Why? Because King Henry VI is basically indisposed. So this individual, Edward, gets over grief from his loss of his father, and now he is Duke of York. This war is going on, and he will more or less say, it's between you and me, saying that to the Queen. And you see what happens. During these Wars of the Roses, it gets very serious. And they will actually take the king and hold him. Well, we've done that before, haven't we? Edward II, Richard II, they were manhandled and treated rather rudely, I might say. So Henry, who probably doesn't know where he is, he's taken under protective custody, as they say in the movies. So Margaret and little Edward go to France, but not to just hang out, like you would on the Riviera. They are there to get an army ready to go, because Edward IV is now saying, gosh, I don't see a king anywhere. King, where's the king? I think I've heard this before. Maybe, would you all like to form a parliament so we can talk about the situation? Yeah, that's the plan. But as the French would say, amour will come about. Oh, look, I couldn't resist it. The tree, it's back. It comes back. There he is. So there's Richard. I think every home should have one of these, that you can look at. I know. Just want to see it. In the mornings, you get up and with your Raisin Bran, and you can look at a different collection. This would be fun. Sharing it with family and friends. But just to notice, there's Richard, and then look down and you say, gosh, biology is wonderful. Look at all that fertility. You're very right. This, of course, is Richard's family. There's Anne, there's the man who will become King Edward IV. See Edward IV right there? Because the reason I want you to notice Edward IV is that poor Henry's in the tower. But I don't know if Henry knows he's in the tower. And his wife, the Queen, they're in France, working on building the army to get back in power. Now, what's significant here? Oh, there he is. There's little Eddie. Say, nice little boy. So they're there. She's working the crowds. Be interesting to go into detail in this, but there are all kinds of former friends of Edward that she will contact, and boy, he did you wrong, but I really am fond of you. Let's work together for the betterment of England and get Henry out. Because their idea is they're going to get Henry out of the tower and put him back on the throne. You say, well, is he up to the job? Probably not. But for the sake of her son, she is anxious that Lancastrian line be restored. So that seems to be what it is all about. And here is the love of Edward's life. A very interesting individual. There are so many interesting women in this case, in this saga of the Wars of the Roses. But this is an interesting one because, again, she's not of the top nobility. She had originally she was from a well-to-do family and married to a pro-Lancastrian knight. And when he had died and she got out to dating again, I know you have to sometimes cut that period of mourning kind of abbreviated. She's out looking, and this is, I'm not sure she looked like, oh, that's very pious, the way she's looking. I don't know if she was, we don't know these things, but basically, her future husband, Edward IV, as he will be, was quite a ladies' man. Quite. And how she obtained him and would become the mother of his 10, count them, 10 children, is a story that few can imagine, because all of these people at the time were shocked he would marry her. And when you marry a Woodville, as so often happens, you marry the family. You're gonna love my uncle. I think he wants to be Archbishop of Canterbury, honey. And she turns over, pillow talk, and turns over and says, could you make my uncle? This happens so often in history, but that will happen in this case. All of these people, these Woodvilles, all show up and they're all hungry. Oh, I just need a little bit. Just a little bit, Roy. Yeah, the filth, the greed. Yes. So, in fact, all of this will be indicative. But Edward IV will retake England. So, he may have been unpopular. He may have had to deal with the filth of nepotism. Cousin this and uncle that, and they're all those Woodvilles. And that's very important to our story, by the way. So he will reign, and what becomes of the former Lancastrians? Well, poor Henry, who had been temporarily liberated, will go back to his suite, the Richard II Memorial Suite, I'm sure. It will go back, and I'll never forget the what they call beef eaters, at the Tower of London. He says the man was saying the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, when they ran the sword through him. I don't know if that's a true story or just something to increase the tip, but whatever the case, that was very sad, but an idea that is not unbelievable considering the piety of Henry VI and, of course, his mental state. Henry IV no longer wanted him around, or rather Edward IV no longer wanted him around because he was just getting, on his nerves. All of this, of course, is to illustrate the beauty of this Margaret of Anjou. And again, she's really running the show. If you think about it, all for her son. Even though she has to consider my husband despite his condition. And she does much of this in France when she builds up her army and brings it about. Quite an interesting portrayal of her. She brings it about. Unfortunately for her, Edward IV will raise an equally strong army and defeat Margaret and her son. This depiction is basically the young Edward IV taking Margaret's son, Prince Edward, and you know where Prince Edward's going. Yeah. He is headed for death, just like his father, because we don't want any survivors. They do not do away with Margaret. It's interesting. She goes back to France as a poor widow, and that's the end of her. Very sad story all the way around, but Edward, that is the son of Margaret of Anjou, was one of those great might-have-beens of history. But he certainly, Mother's Day would have been wonderful, wouldn't it, Bob? Because he owed a lot to Margaret of Anjou. Not so much Henry, bless his heart, but that mother. So, now we have, I called it elimination of Henry. He passed away. Probably another case of melancholia. And Edward ruled, I always say, cirrhosis or whatever. He was a very hardy partier. Now, Elizabeth Woodville, very fertile, children by both first husband and 10 by King Edward. And when he dies at the age of about 40, I love this. And this is Edward V. Play that, as a parlor game. How many people know Edward V? You'll get some, wow, do you know who that is? Yes, thanks to Ollie, I do. Yes, I attended Ollie class. That's Edward V. Now, talk about a quick reign. That's very quick. He's dressed in the Order of the Garter, the son of Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, and he will become King Edward V. You can imagine, I suspect, that it will not be a long reign. Yes, it's a very short reign. Very short, you say, but why? He had so much promise. Cute kid. Looks great in his Order of the Garter outfit. Yes. And he is half Woodville too, isn't he? And of course, we know what that means. He has an uncle. Yes. I think it was played by Al Pacino.
I think so.
Yeah. But the Hunchback of Shakespeare and all the rest, Richard. Richard loved his brother. Now, you got to give him credit for that. If they got a Brothers' Day or something. They were tight. So why does Richard have such a bad reputation in history? Well, part of it has to do with Shakespeare, of course. And part of it has to do with those blankety blank Woodvilles. Richard was not happy about Big Brother's marriage. And when he saw these Woodvilles taking all the good positions, because, I mean, Richard was not just sitting around, eating bonbons and making new female friends. He was very busy in the royal responsibilities, being the major royal military leader in northern England. So what was going on, according to some, is that he thought of this Edward V and his younger brother as being illegitimate. Very convenient, isn't it? And yes. This is a bit romantic, maybe, but whatever became of them, and again, this will be perfect to show off to your friends, because they won't know about Edward V unless they have Cliff Notes, because it's in Cliff Notes. But regular people may not know this. But these, according to the story, they will be isolated. Their mother, of course, has no way of getting them. She's with her other children. I mean, she does have 8 others. Well, 10 others, including the first marriage. So they're indisposed. And that's the end of them. And Richard will proclaim himself king. The idea is these boys had Woodville blood. So according to Richard and his supporters, their blood was tainted because they had Woodville blood. And you say, why is that tainted? Well, because according to Richard's supporters, Elizabeth was not really married to Edward. It wasn't a big marriage. Remember Diana and Charles and how we all got up early to watch it? It wasn't like that. They just went to some sort of English justice of the peace. It's like they just it wasn't like, and then the king comes in and says, guess what? This is my bride. And everybody's like, what? It's kind of like that. So there he is. Well, looks like he's had a bad day. Dower, yeah. Well, again, that's our Richard III. And he will become king from 1483 to 85. And according to Shakespeare, very bad times. And we need someone who will save us from this terrible man. And who could be this man? From Wales. Yes, a Welshman. You would hardly believe that in terms of how people feel about, the English feel about the Welsh. I mean, it's kind of negative, but it's according to this, Henry inherited the Lancastrian claims, and he says, you know what you are, Richard? We're ready for the U word again. Yeah, we're bandying it about. You're another usurper. And guess what? I'm coming back to bring the true claims of the true king. And how am I going to do it? Well, I'm going to kill you. That's how I'm going to do it. So seems to be the way. Battle of Bosworth Field. That could be on your final 1485. You need to remember that. I mean, you know so many already, but this is just one more to add to the collection of famous dates because everybody in English history knows that. So this is not going to be like an Edward V. This is something that's common knowledge. If you go to an English history convention and you call it Bosworth Field, everybody goes, yeah. So this will be on your tour. So that will be the end of Richard, my horse, my kingdom for horse, and all of that. And of course, finally, no burying of dead kings, monarchs. 2012, one of the very, very famous scenes where they found those remains, and that's always worth a trip. And they probably put themselves on the map through there because I'm thinking it was not famous. I mean, it's like there were all that question, where is Richard? You know, where is Richard? And that's, of course, and they went through with a great great funeral there. As a result, I think it was in 15 or thereabouts. And I always thought it was very ironic since they had a Church of England service for a good Catholic. And I'm thinking, I wonder how Richard III would have felt by being buried by a bunch of Anglicans. You know, I mean, Catholics don't say we. I know you're our brothers and sisters. I don't think we're ready for the ecumenical period at that point, but that's what really happened, and that's where he's buried. So you can check it out there in Leicester. And we get to end with the rose. What a beautiful flower. We love roses. And we think, oh, this is so happy. I want to call FTD after class. Just to think. But what it represents, of course, is the fact that Henry now married what became a very successful marriage with the daughter of Elizabeth of York, whose brothers had presumably died in the Tower. Very practical woman. She had, I think, 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. And she will be the mother of Henry VIII, in case you don't recall. But the idea is, and in the Shakespeare play, this is very much emphasized. They bring them out, and of course, it's Lancastrian and York together in the Tudors. And now we are one. And there are no more wars of roses. Are there any living, breathing Yorkists? Well, there's my beautiful, loving wife, Elizabeth of York. We're so happy. And we have our great children. And I'm Henry VII, and I'm the Tudor, and having a great rule. There we are. I mean, she misses her brothers, I'm sure, but you have to be practical. Life is for the living, yeah. And so, does she miss her Uncle Richard? I don't think so. Uncle Richard was seriously bad. So, finally, I just can't resist showing you this. You always think about interesting ways of dying. How would you like to be dipped into some? Yeah. You know, it's like the Dunking machine. And that's what Edward did to his brother. So in case you're thinking, Edward IV, he loved all people. No, he didn't. He didn't love his younger brother. And this is George of Duke of Clarence, who had too many Lancastrians. So, what a way to go, right? I don't think they would do this to a peasant. They just hang them, you know. These people, though, instead of being beheaded, you get drowned in wine. And I don't know if this would be your better wines, you know, the kind you would drink, not Ripple or something like that. I mean, this would be really good stuff. Okay. You can't get it at Piggly Wiggly. I mean, this would be really good stuff. So he had 2 children. And I have to show you. That is Henry, put one of those children in the Tower of London, this little fellow. He was known as Edward Plantagenet, but cute little people grow up. And then they are no longer cute and little. So he is shut up. They say he had very little human companionship, and then at 25, Henry VII had him executed because he was breathing, he's running around. There's always the chance he'll escape. So he'll be happier in heaven or purgatory or something. So that's the end. Basically, you know, clear them out. You know, you talk about mafia, and it is like, you know, we don't want anybody who could challenge us. And you think, well, don't you think the Queen was sad that her little cousin? History doesn't tell us that, but I guess there is so much of this going on. So Henry, as founder of the Tudor dynasty, does not want competition because I brought these together. It's a beautiful rose, red and white. No more wars, and we are rulers. Thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing you all next time. Our last time. Please come back. Parliament. I love Parliament.